The wind tore across the bow of the cruise ship, sharp with salt and engine heat, rattling metal railings like warning bells. Loose papers skidded across the deck and vanished over the side, swallowed instantly by the open ocean. Leo stood a few steps back from the safety barrier, one hand braced against the cold steel. He watched the scene unfold, feeling like he had stepped into a moment that did not belong to him. The ocean stretched endlessly. Below, deep blue, calm and uncaring. Above it all, one voice cut through everything, loud enough to overpower the wind. "Do you understand how rules work?" Susan shouted, her words snapped hard, sharp and relentless. She stood dangerously close to the edge, feet planted wide, as if daring the ship itself. To challenge her authority, her white sleeveless dress with large light blue flowers whipped violently around her knees. The wind pushed and pulled at her, but she did not flinch. Her blonde hair, stiffly styled, slapped against her face, refusing to stay in place. In one hand, she gripped a dark clipboard, knuckles pale with pressure. Her other hand sliced through the air with sharp, angry gestures. Her face was flushed, eyes wide, unblinking, mouth open mid-yell, as if she had been shouting for hours and planned to keep going. The captain stood directly in front of her, only a few feet away, tall, broad shouldered, dressed in a crisp white uniform that looked almost unreal against the chaos. His cap sat perfectly straight, his posture relaxed but unmovable. He did not raise his voice, he did not interrupt, he simply listened, hands folded loosely behind his back. Gaze, steady expression, unreadable. Passengers gathered everywhere. Some pressed against the forward windows, others leaned over. Interior rails on the upper decks, faces formed a quiet mosaic of curiosity, discomfort and anticipation. Phones were held low, but ready. No one spoke. They did not need to, the tension was loud enough. Leo felt his stomach tighten. He had not planned on being here, had not planned on watching a stranger unravel at the front of a cruise ship before noon. This was supposed to be a relaxing week. He was 38, tired in a way sleep did not fix. This trip had been his attempt to disappear. No deadlines, no meetings, no explanations, just ocean routine and anonymity. That anonymity shattered the moment. Susan swept her glare across the invisible crowd. The look felt accusatory, even from where Leo stood. She pointed the clipboard at the captain's chest, as if it were a badge of authority instead of laminated paper. "I am telling you," she said, her voice shaking now with something sharper than anger, "this ship cannot function. If people are allowed to do whatever they want, someone has to enforce standards." The captain nodded once slowly, the kind of nod people give when deciding how much patience they have left. Earlier that morning, none of this had seemed inevitable. Leo had been on the upper deck with a paper cup of burnt coffee, watching the horizon split the sky cleanly in half. The ship hummed beneath his feet, steady and reassuring. He remembered thinking how good it felt to be carried somewhere without having to steer. Susan had been there too, though he had not known her name. She stood out immediately, not because of how she looked, but because of how she moved, purposeful and inspecting. She walked the deck the way someone walks property they believe belongs to them, eyes scanning for flaws. When a couple laughed too loudly near the pool, she frowned. When a crew member passed without making eye contact, she stiffened. The first confrontation happened near the buffet. A teenage boy lingered at the dessert station, debating between cakes. Susan stepped forward, placed herself directly beside him, and cleared her throat loudly. "There is a line," she said, tapping her clipboard against the counter. The boy flushed and moved on without arguing. The crew member offered Susan an apologetic smile she had not earned. Leo noticed, but told himself it was not his business. Ships were full of strange people. That was part of the deal. By midday, she was impossible to ignore. Susan corrected a man about chair placement on the sun deck, informed a woman that children should not run after a certain hour, and loudly reminded a group of friends that music volume was a shared responsibility each time she spoke with absolute certainty, as if the rules existed simply because she believed in them hard enough. The moment it became personal for Leo happened fast, and publicly he had set his backpack beside an empty lounge chair while he went to grab a towel when he returned. Susan was standing over it. "You cannot leave personal items unattended," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Leo blinked and said he had been gone maybe 2 minutes. "That does not matter." Susan replied, "It creates disorder." He laughed, thinking she was joking, but she did not laugh back. "I need you to move this," she continued, already writing on her clipboard. "I am documenting repeated issues." Leo asked, "Documenting for who?" And Susan answered, "For the ship." As if that explained everything, a crew member approached, drawn by the raised voices. Susan did not pause. She turned on him, to explaining how lack of enforcement led to chaos, how people like Leo took advantage of systems unless corrected. The crew member listened, nodded politely, and said he would handle it, giving Leo an apologetic glance. Heavy with exhaustion, Leo moved his bag more stunned than angry, but something settled uneasily in his chest. This was not about rules, this was about control. Susan escalated quickly after that, inserting herself into conversations, interrupting crew instructions to add her own questioning safety procedures she clearly did not understand. Each time someone pushed back, she raised her voice, citing experience, citing authority no one had given her. When the captain finally appeared, responding to a growing cluster of complaints, Susan saw her opportunity. She marched straight toward him, clipboard raised like a shield. "This has gone on long enough," she announced. "I demand to speak with whoever is actually in charge." The captain introduced himself calmly, but Susan barely let him finish. Leo watched as the crowd thickened, curiosity hardening into expectation. The captain gestured toward the front of the ship, inviting Susan to continue the conversation somewhere safer and quieter. She agreed loudly, as if she were the one granting permission. Now standing at the bow, with the wind roaring and the ocean yawning below, Susan looked larger than life, fueled by an audience and her own certainty. Leo edged closer, unable to look away. Susan inhaled sharply, shoulders lifting as if drawing strength from the crowd. She pretended not to see. Her eyes flicked toward the glass, registering the silhouettes of passengers watching her. For a brief moment Leo thought he saw hesitation flicker across her face, then it vanished instantly. She straightened, her spine lifted, her chin, and began speaking faster, louder, stacking words on top of each other in a rush that sounded practiced and rehearsed. "I have dealt with situations like this for years," she said. "I know how quickly things fall apart when leadership refuses to lead people like him," she added, jerking her head toward Leo without even looking. "Push boundaries, because no one stops them." He'd rushed into Leo's face. He had not said a single word, yet he was suddenly part of her narrative. Cast as proof of disorder behind the glass, a few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone shook their heads slowly. The captain's gaze followed, Susan's gesture landing briefly on Leo. There was no accusation, there only awareness. Then he returned, his attention to Susan, still silent. Susan mistook that silence for surrender. That silence, she said loudly, "is exactly the problem." The wind surged again, snapping the hem of her dress hard against her legs. The clipboard rattled as she tightened her grip. Leo noticed the details, the way her foot tapped once against the deck, the way her words began to tangle at the edges. She was running on momentum now, on the belief that if she kept pushing, something would give. Leo's heart pounded. Part of him wanted to step forward to say something, anything, but another part of him knew better. This was no longer his confrontation. It had grown beyond him, beyond rules, beyond any single complaint. It was about power, and who truly held it. The captain finally shifted his weight. The movement was subtle, barely noticeable, but the effect was immediate. Susan stopped mid-sentence, thrown off by the smallest change behind the glass. The crowd leaned in as one Leo held his breath. The ocean roared below. The ship surged ahead, steady and unmoved, and in that suspended moment, it was clear that whatever came next would change the course of everything. The captain's shift changed the air instantly. Susan noticed it. Her voice faltered for half a second, just long enough to betray uncertainty, before she surged forward again, louder than before, as if volume alone could restore control. Do not look at him, she snapped, pointing again without turning. This is about the ship, about safety, about standards. I am trying to help you, the captain finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, barely raised above the wind, ma'am. I understand your concerns. Susan smiled tightly, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Good, then you understand why I need your crew to start enforcing proper conduct immediately. Leo felt the weight of every watching eye shift between them. Passengers behind the glass leaned closer, drawn by the rare sight of authority meeting resistance head-on. No one interrupted. The silence stretched, just long enough to make Susan uncomfortable. The captain nodded. Once we already do, Susan laughed, sharp, dismissive clearly. Not. She launched into a rapid list of grievances, noise violations, improper use of shared spaces, crew members who encouraged disorder by being too relaxed. She spoke as if presenting evidence, pacing along the bow heels, clicking against the deck. Clipboards snapping open and shut. Leo studied the captain's face. There was no anger there, no defensiveness, only patience, the kind built by years of storms that could not be argued with. He let her talk. He let her dig. Susan mistook patience for weakness. She stepped closer, invading his space, lowering her voice just enough to sound conspiratorial while still being heard. You might not realize it yet, but people like me are your best allies. We see problems before they explode. The phrase, people like me, landed heavy, soaked in entitlement. The captain took one step back, restoring distance, ma'am. He said evenly, this ship operates under maritime law and company policy. Passengers are not authorized to enforce rules on other passengers. Susan froze. The wind rushed past, filling the silence. Her eyes narrowed. So you are saying I should just let people do whatever they want? She asked. I am saying, the captain replied, that if there is an issue, you report it to the crew. Susan scoffed. I did repeatedly. Nothing changed. Leo felt something shift, because the story she was telling no longer matched reality. And he knew he was not the only one who noticed. Susan resumed, pacing faster now. I have managed communities for years, she said. You do not get ordered by asking nicely, you get it by setting consequences. The captain's gaze followed her calmly. This is not a community association, it is the same principle, Susan insisted. People need boundaries. Leo could not help himself. They have boundaries, he said, voice steady, but loud enough to carry. They are just not yours. Susan whipped around, eyes blazing. Excuse me. The captain raised a hand, not toward Leo, but toward Susan. Sir, he said, without looking back. Thank you, I've got this. Leo fell silent, hard hammering. He had not planned to speak, but it was too late now. The line had been crossed again, and this time it was public. Susan rounded on the captain, anger flushing her face. You see, she said, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Disrespect, undermining authority. The captain met her gaze. You are not the authority here. The words landed cleanly, without malice, without emphasis, making them sharper. Susan laughed again, but brittle. That's your opinion. No, the captain said. That's a fact. Behind the glass, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted slightly higher. Susan noticed her eyes flicked toward the reflections, catching glimpses of herself, framed by the ship's interior, by faces watching, recording. "You're making a mistake," she said, lowering her voice. "I have a following, people. Listen to me." The captain inclined his head slightly. Then, "I suggest you set a better example." Susan bristled. "Are you threatening me?" "No," he replied. "I'm informing you." The wind surged again, and for a moment the ship seemed to lean into it, steady and unmoved. Susan's grip tightened on the clipboard until the plastic creaked. Leo noticed her breathing quick and shallow, the way people breathe when they're losing control but refused to admit it. She changed tactics, her voice softened her shoulders. Relaxing as if offering compromise. "Look, we got off on the wrong foot," she said. "I just want this cruise to be enjoyable for everyone." The captain waited. "I can help." Susan continued, "You give me limited authority. Unofficially, I keep things running smoothly. You don't have to deal with constant complaints." Leo almost laughed at the audacity around him. Others shifted disbelief plain on their faces. The captain shook his head. "That won't be happening." Susan's mask slipped completely then. "So that's it?" she demanded. "You're just going to ignore everything I've said?" The captain said, "I've heard you, and I've made my position clear." Susan's voice rose again, sharp, uncontrolled. "This ship is going to descend into chaos." Leo glanced behind the glass. Children laughed. Somewhere inside, a couple shared a drink, unaware or unconcerned. The cruise looked exactly as it should, calm and orderly, despite Susan's predictions. "You're overreacting," Leo said quietly, unable to stop himself. Susan spun toward him. "You don't get to speak." The captain's expression hardened slightly. "He said he does. Everyone does, within reason." Susan opened her mouth, then closed it again, visibly recalibrating. She looked around, truly seeing the audience, the phones, the faces. The fact that this moment was no longer private, no longer controllable. She straightened, lifting her chin. "Fine," she said. "If you won't act, I will." The captain raised an eyebrow. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" Susan smiled, slow, confident. "I'll make sure people know what kind of operation you're running." Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Threats like that did not come from strength, they came from desperation. The captain turned, slightly pressing a hand to the radio clipped at his shoulder. He did not speak into it, yet simply rested his fingers there. Thoughtful. Susan followed his gaze, realization dawning too late that she might have pushed too far behind the glass. The crowd leaned in again, breath held, as the captain finally took a breath of his own and prepared to respond. The captain's fingers rested on the radio, unmoving, as Susan waited for him to blink first. The wind carried the smell of salt and fuel mixing with sharp tension hanging over the bow. Leo felt the moment stretch heavy and fragile like glass under pressure. Susan shifted her weight, her confidence wobbling just enough for him to notice. The captain finally pressed the button and spoke, quietly requesting security and guest services forward. He released the radio and looked at Susan calmly, not with anger but with certainty, and that certainty unsettled her more than shouting ever could. Susan's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before masking it with a scoff. "Calling back up already?" she said, forcing a laugh that sounded thin against the wind. "Tells me everything I need to know." Leo watched her tighten, her grip on the clipboard, the edges bending slightly under her fingers. The captain did not respond. He simply stood, grounded, unyielding, as though the ship itself had lent him its stability. The silence he allowed was deliberate, and Susan filled it with restless movement, pacing, muttering under her breath. Passengers behind the glass shifted closer, drawn by the unmistakable signal that something decisive was unfolding. Leo could see reflections of their faces layered over Susan's rigid posture, over the captain's calm stance. The moment felt suspended between outcomes. Susan cleared her throat loudly. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is unnecessary." The captain met her gaze. "What's unnecessary," he replied, "is continuing this conversation without witnesses who can document it properly." The word document made Susan flinch. though she tried to hide it. By lifting her chin defiantly, security arrived first, 2 officers moving with practiced calm, positioning themselves slightly. Behind the captain, guest services followed their expressions, professional but alert. Susan's voice rose. "Immediately good," she said. "You can all hear this. I'm being harassed for trying to maintain order." Leo felt a spark of disbelief ripple through the crowd. The captain turned, slightly addressing the newcomers, with quiet efficiency. He summarized the situation without embellishment, listing behaviors, not accusations. Susan opened her mouth, repeatedly trying to interrupt, but the captain continued. Until he finished. When he finally turned back to her, Susan launched into protest words. Tumbling over each other, she accused passengers of provoking her crew members, of ignoring her concerns. The captain of undermining her efforts, each claim sounding thinner than the last. Leo noticed the way security exchanged brief glances, the way guest services began taking notes. Susan noticed too, her voice grew sharper, more desperate volume, climbing as control slipped further from her grasp. "None of this would have happened if you just listened," Susan insisted. "I warned you. I warned all of you." The captain raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said, his tone unchanged. "Multiple passengers have submitted formal complaints about your conduct." Susan froze. The wind rushed past them, filling the pause. Leo saw the exact moment realization struck her, the flicker of calculation behind her eyes as she understood. The scale had tipped. "That's impossible," Susan said quickly. "They're exaggerating." The captain nodded slightly. "That's why we document everything." He gestured toward guest services, statements, timestamps, video evidence. The word video landed heavily. Susan's gaze darted toward the glass, toward the raised phones. She could no longer pretend not to see. Her breathing quickened. She laughed again, brittle, and forced people record everything. "These days," she said. "That doesn't mean it's accurate." The captain regarded her steadily. "Accuracy is exactly why this process exists." Susan took. Leo wasn't entirely sure how much time had passed. The wind still tore across the bow, but the intensity of the confrontation had shifted the atmosphere around them. Susan stood there, still gripping her clipboard, her confidence wavering but not gone completely. She muttered under her breath, pacing back and forth, occasionally glancing at the captain as if seeking approval that would never come. The passengers behind the glass leaned forward, curiosity mingling with disbelief, some recording the scene, others just watching the tension mount. The captain remained calm, composed, unyielding. His presence alone seemed to steady the chaos around him. Susan tried to regain control, louder now, sharper now, her words tumbling faster than before. "This ship must maintain order," she said. "Passengers cannot be allowed to ignore rules. Crew members cannot be lax. I have seen the consequences of disorder." Leo felt the weight of her conviction, but he also saw its flaw. He saw how she had cast herself as the authority when no one had given her that role. The captain raised a hand to quiet her. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you have made your concerns clear. We have heard them." Susan's lips tightened. She did not like being ignored. She stepped closer, leaning slightly toward him, as if to assert dominance. The captain did not flinch. He simply met her gaze. The silence stretched long enough to make Susan shift uneasily behind the glass. Passengers murmured, whispers flowing like waves. Leo watched the subtle dance of power, Susan gesturing, pointing, raising her voice, the captain responding calmly with a single word or gesture. Each move, deliberate. Each pause, measured. Susan's breath quickened. She attempted to speak over him. She shouted, "I am only trying to help you understand the importance of proper enforcement." The captain held up a hand, stopping her again. "Ma'am," he said, "everyone has responsibilities on this ship, including you." Susan froze for a heartbeat. Leo could see her calculating what to Do next she glanced toward the raised phones, cameras everywhere, capturing every moment she inhaled sharply, trying to regain momentum. But it was clear her control was slipping. The captain's calm certainty had grounded the situation. She clenched her clipboard, her knuckles white. She started pacing. Again back and forth, heels clicking against the deck, her voice rising louder and faster. We must have order on this ship. We cannot allow disorder. Passengers must obey rules. Crew must follow instructions. The captain watched her quietly, the wind whipping their hair and clothes around them. Susan's eyes flicked toward Leo again, as if she needed him to validate her presence. He did not move or speak. He simply observed the growing absurdity of her. Crusade, the crowd behind the glass, pressed closer, curiosity mixed with concern. Some phones now fully raised, recording every gesture, every word. Leo felt a mixture of tension and disbelief. The scene had escalated far beyond any ordinary complaint. It had become a spectacle, a test of authority, patience, and composure. The captain finally stepped forward slightly, not to threaten, but to assert quiet control. Susan stopped mid-pace, her voice faltering. She glanced at him, eyes wide. The moment hung suspended. The wind roared, the ocean stretched endlessly below the deck, rattling the railings. The clipboard in her hand shook slightly. She inhaled sharply, preparing to speak again. But the captain's calm gaze stopped her cold. Susan's voice faltered just a fraction, the pause long enough for Leo to notice her shifting weight. She straightened quickly, as if trying to reclaim authority. I am only trying to keep this ship safe, she said louder. This is about standards. Passengers and crew alike must follow the rules. The captain regarded her steadily. Ma'am, he said calmly, the rules and procedures are already in place. We enforce them as needed. Susan's lips pressed together, her chest heaving. She glanced toward the crowd behind the glass, their faces a mix of fascination and disbelief. Some smiling at the spectacle, others shaking their heads. She turned back to the captain, her hands gripping the clipboard tighter. I have been managing communities for years, she said. I know how quickly things fall apart when leadership refuses to lead. People like him take advantage. Leo felt the words land heavily on him. He had not spoken a word yet. She had singled him out again as an example. The captain stepped slightly closer, without raising his voice, maintaining a presence that anchored the moment. Ma'am, he said, the ship has clear procedures. Passengers and crew are expected to follow them. Reporting concerns to the crew is the correct course. Susan exhaled, sharply trying to regain momentum, but her voice lost some of its conviction. She gestured toward the deck, toward passengers, toward Leo to emphasize her point. I will not stand by while people ignore the rules, she said. We cannot allow disorder now. Behind the glass, passengers leaned forward, many recording, their phones raised. The scene was being captured from multiple angles. Susan realized this, and her confidence wavered slightly. The captain remained calm. A subtle nod toward security and guest services was enough to let them know he was in control. Susan's hand tightened around the clipboard, her knuckles white. She began pacing again, her heels clicking sharply against the deck. She spoke faster, louder, trying to fill the silence with words, as if volume alone could reassert control. This ship must maintain order. Everyone must obey the rules. Passengers must not leave items unattended. Crew must follow instructions. The captain watched her without interruption. The wind whipped around them, tugging at clothes, hair, and the edges of her dress. Susan's eyes flicked toward Leo one more time, her gaze demanding recognition. He remained silent, observing the unraveling scene behind the glass, passengers shifting and murmuring. Leo felt a strange mix of amusement and tension. The situation had grown far beyond normal. Susan's crusade for control had collided with the calm authority of the captain. The moment stretched, the wind roaring, the ocean yawning below the bow, the clipboard rattling in her hands, and the passengers watching every word, every gesture. The captain's presence remained steady, grounded, unmoving. Susan exhaled sharply, preparing for another tirade, but the calm authority of the captain held the moment in suspension. The bow of the ship became a stage, the wind a chorus, the ocean a backdrop, and Susan, the sole performer, struggling to dominate a scene that refused to obey her. Susan's pace quickened again, her voice rising louder now, sharper, now faster. "We cannot allow chaos," she shouted. "Passengers must follow the rules. Crew must maintain order." The captain's gaze never wavered. He remained calm, composed, grounded, his presence alone quieting the tension around him. Susan's hand tightened on the clipboard. It rattled against the deck. She gestured wildly, emphasizing each point. She spun slightly toward Leo, as if he were the proof of disorder. He stayed silent, observing the spectacle behind the glass. Passengers leaning forward, their phones raised, recording the confrontation. The wind whipped their hair and clothes. The ocean stretched endlessly below the bow, the ship humming steadily through the waves. Susan exhaled sharply, trying to reclaim control. "I am only trying to help," she said. "My intention is to maintain standards." The captain lifted a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "your intentions are noted, but the rules and procedures are already in place." Susan froze for a moment, processing his words. She glanced toward the glass and the crowd, their faces reflecting disbelief, curiosity, and fascination. The realization that she was no longer commanding the room began to settle in. She shifted, her weight pacing a small line on the deck, her heels clicking sharply against the wood. She inhaled deeply, attempting to launch into another series of grievances. "Passengers and crew must follow protocol," she said. "I have seen what happens when there is no enforcement." The captain watched her silently, a subtle nod to security and guest services, letting them know he had control. Susan's voice rose again, louder, faster, trying to dominate the moment, volume replacing authority. "This ship must maintain order," she said. "Noise violations, improper conduct, unattended items, everyone must comply." Leo felt a tightening in his chest, the absurdity of her self-imposed authority striking him. The captain remained unmoved, each word from Susan met with calm observation, each gesture answered only by silence. Susan's eyes flicked toward Leo, once more demanding acknowledgement. He did not respond. She exhaled sharply, pivoting toward the bow, trying to regain momentum, her words tumbling over each other faster and faster. The wind ripped around them, pulling at her dress, at her hair, the clipboard rattling against her side. Behind the glass, passengers leaned closer, some recording every movement. The scene had become a spectacle, a study in control and resistance, the captain's steady presence grounding the moment against the storm of Susan's rage. Every step, every word she took only highlighted the contrast. The bow of the ship became a stage, the ocean a backdrop, the wind a chorus, and Susan the performer, struggling to assert power in a space that refused to bend to her will. Susan's confidence finally faltered, the wind whipping her dress and hair around her. She exhaled sharply, her voice rising, then breaking. "I just want this cruise to be safe and orderly," she said, her words tumbling over each other. The captain remained calm, steady, grounded. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "the procedures are in place. The crew is responsible for enforcement. Passengers are expected to follow the rules." Susan's eyes flicked toward the raised phones, toward the faces watching her. She realized she was no longer in control. The crowd had become a mirror, reflecting her own overreach. She gripped the clipboard, tighter, knuckles white her chest, heaving, the wind tugging at her. She started pacing small steps back and forth, trying to maintain momentum, but the calm authority of the captain held the moment in suspension. Leo watched quietly, the absurdity, the intensity. The spectacle unfolding, the captain stepped forward slightly, not to threaten, but to assert presence. Susan froze mid-step, her voice faltering for the first time behind the glass passengers. Leaned forward, curiosity, amazement, and relief mixing in the same moment. She exhaled sharply, lowered her voice, and muttered almost to herself, perhaps. "I have overstepped." The captain's gaze remained steady, his calm, unyielding presence like the ship itself. Susan shifted her weight one last time, releasing a small sigh of frustration. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and looked around at the crowd, realizing that the moment was no longer hers to control. She stepped back finally, her voice softer, quieter, acknowledging silently that her authority had limits. The captain nodded, once subtly, letting security and guest services know the situation was contained. The wind continued to roar, the ocean stretched endlessly below the bow. Leo felt tension ease slightly, the spectacle had reached its conclusion. Susan stepped aside, the clipboard dangling loosely at her side. The passengers slowly relaxed, murmurs spreading. Behind the glass, the ship continued its steady course, cutting through the waves, the wind tugging at clothes, hair, and railings. The moment hanging in memory, a reminder of order, authority, and the limits of control. Leo exhaled deeply, the ocean calm beneath him, the captain grounded and unshaken, and Susan, a storm finally spent. The bow of the ship returned to quiet, the spectacle over, and the cruise continuing forward, unbroken by her outburst. Leo turned, slightly looked out over the endless blue water, feeling the weight of the encounter and the strange relief that followed, knowing he had witnessed a rare collision of certainty and restraint. A story that would linger in memory, carried on the wind and waves as the ship moved steadily toward the horizon.